The Cold War by Samuel Granado, Nacho Nebral, Ismael Olivera, Sara Rivero, Noemí Sánchez, and Gabriel Atienza.
The Korean War was caused by the Cold War tensions and the division of Korea after the Second World War. The North, backed by the Soviet Union and China, sought to unify the country under communism, while the South, supported by the US and the UN, resisted. Diplomatic efforts failed, and on the June of 25 of 1950, North Korea invaded the South. North Korea invaded the South and nearly conquered it, but a UN and counter-offensive pushed back to the Chinese border. China then intervened, forcing the UN to retreat. And finally, in 1953, an armistice was signed without a peace treaty, keeping Korea divided. The Korean War kept Korea divided, causing $1 million of deaths and devastated both economies. It strengthened Cold War alliances, with the US backing South Korea and China supporting the North. The war increased global tensions, expanded US anti-communist policies, and cemented China as military power. Its legacy persists as Korea remains divided with ongoing tensions. The most important figures during this war were Kim Il-sung, which was the leader of North Korea and main investigator of the invasion of South, and Syngman Rhee, which was the president of South Korea, advocate for unification under anti-communist government.
We are going to talk about the Suez Crisis. The Suez Crisis is also known as the Second Arabic-Israeli War, occurred in 1956 and was a diplomatic and military conflict involving Egypt, Israel, the United Kingdom, and France. It all started in July 1956, when the Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser announced the nationalization of the Suez Canal, which had previously been operated by the Suez Canal Company, largely owned by British and French interests. The canal was a crucial maritime passage for global oil and trade, especially for Europe. Then Israel, concerned about Egypt's hostility and its blue slate of Israeli ships in the Red Sea, certainly began planning military action. In late October 1956, Israel invaded the Sinai Peninsula and advanced towards the canal. Then, British and France both worried about the closure of the Suez Canal, and Nasser rise to power, joining Israel in the military campaign. Then, the United States under President Dwight Eisenhower and in the Soviet Union, led by Nikita Khrushchev, was opposed to the invasion as well. Both of them wanted to avoid a broader Middle Eastern conflict and didn't want to be seen as supporting European colonial ambitions. Then, a military campaign quickly stalled as a result of the international pressure, particularly from the United States. And a United Nations peacekeeping force was deployed to monitor the situation and help with the ceasefire. The conflict ended in humiliating defeat from Britain and France, both of whom were forced to halt their military actions. Then, the Suez Crisis marked the end of Britain and France as global colonial powers, and the canal remained under Egyptian control, and the conflict marked a shift in the geographical landscape of the Middle East.
The Berlin Wall. After the World War II, the Allies occupied Germany and divided it into 4 zones: American, Soviet, British, and French. Berlin was located in the Soviet sector. It was divided into 2 zones: West Berlin, part of the Federal Republic of Germany, and East Berlin, which was the capital of the Democratic Republic of Germany. West Berlin was more prosperous than the eastern sector, and its people had more freedom. For that reason, many East Berliners escaped to the Western Berlin. In 1961, in order to end this mass migration, the communists built the Berlin Wall. It divided Berlin until 1989. The Berlin Wall represents one of the symbols of the Cold War. Another symbol of the Cold War was the Operation Gold or Operation Stopwatch. The Operation Gold was conducted by the American Central Intelligence and the British Secret Intelligence in the 1950s to tap into landline communication of the Soviet Army headquarters in Berlin using a tunnel into the Soviet zone. The tunnel was built in September 1954 and was completed in February. The Americans and British wanted to hear the conversations between East Berlin and Moscow. The Soviet authorities were informed about the Operation Gold from the beginning by George Blake, but decided not to discover the tunnel until April 21, 1956, in order to protect Blake from exposure.
The missile crisis in Cuba causes the Cuban Revolution. In 1959, Fidel Castro defeated the dictator Fulgencio Batista and aligned rapidly with the USSR. This alarmed the USA. The blockade of Cuba. USA imposed an economic siege to Cuba to pressure Castro to abandon the communism. In 1961, USA supported the failed invasion of the Bahía de Cochinos. Armed race. The USSR put nuclear missiles in Cuba, and USA warmed because they were 150 kilometers from her coasts. Development. In October 1962, U-2 spy planes of the CIA photographed bases for Soviet nuclear missiles. These bases were threat to USA because Soviets could bomb them. The 22nd of October of 1962, John Kennedy tell a television speech to announce the naval blockade of Cuba. Also, he said that they could consider a military action. Consequences. The crisis wasn't finished as a nuclear war, so the people learned that the tensions could be solved with dialogue. Reinforcement of Fidel Castro and his regime because of the alliance with the USSR. Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. It was a treaty to reduce the nuclear armament of the USSR and the USA. The Red Telephone. It was a direct telephone line that connects the Kremlin with the White House. Location of the missiles. The main Soviet missiles bases were located in San Cristobal, Guanayay, and Remedios. There were short-range missiles that reaches 1,000 miles and long-range missiles that reaches 2,000 miles. Important characters. John Kennedy. He was the president of the USA, and he was the one that imposes the naval blockade of Cuba. Nikita Khrushchev. He was the General Secretary of the Communist Soviet Party, and he sent the missiles to Cuba. Fidel Castro was the dictator of Cuba, and he leads the Cuban Revolution in 1962, but he doesn't act a lot in the crisis. Robert Kennedy. He was the Attorney General of USA, and he played a key role in the negotiations with the Soviets. Anatoly Dobrinin, Soviet ambassador to the USA. He was the intermediary of USA and the USSR.
Arab-Israeli conflict. First one, the causes of the conflict. The main causes of the Arab-Israeli conflict include the territorial dispute between Jews and Arabs. Both peoples, Jews and Arabs, claim the land of Palestine as their own land to live there. Another cause of the conflict was the British Mandate and the contradictory promises. During the World War I, the British people made promises to both the Jews in the Balfour Declaration in 1917 and the Arabs creating their own state of region. So, Britain made promises to both sides, not going only for one side. The last cause was the UN partition in 1947. The UN proposed dividing Palestine into a Jewish state and an Arab state. Israel accepted, but the Arab countries rejected the plan and attacked Israel after its independence in 1948. From this, several wars started. The main war episodes. The conflict has involved several wars and confrontations. The first one was the War of Independence between 1948 and 1949. In this war, Israel declared its independence and was attacked by Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq. Israel won, and finally its territory expanded. It was the Suez Crisis in 1956. Israel, along with France and the United Kingdom, invaded Egypt following Nasser's nationalization and the Suez Canal. They withdrew under international pressure, so it didn't do anything. They war in 1967. In this war, Israel defeated Egypt, Jordan, and Syria in 6 days, occupying the West Bank, Gaza, East Jerusalem, the Golden Heights, and Sinai in, as I said before, in only 6 days. The Yom Kippur War in 1973. Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack on Israel as the Yom Kippur was a holiday that Jews used to pray. Although they made initial gains, Israel counterattacked and held its territory, so both Egypt and Syria couldn't do anything. The participating countries. There are a lot of several countries participating in this conflict, but the most important one are Israel and Palestine, that were the main protagonists. Later, United States, that was an ally of Israel. Russia or the USSR, that supported Syria and Iran. And later the United Kingdom and France, that were influential in the United States but later lost importance, and some countries were more important.